Welcome to this demonstration on Automation Hub, Ahead's gateway to enterprise cloud. It helps to begin by thinking about how we got here and why we focus so much on building an automation hub to enable the enterprise cloud. Well, for one, a lot of people are in the cloud, whether that's on-premises in a private cloud scenario or perhaps in a public cloud scenario, but they're still doing this. A developer is trying to get a service, they put in a request, and then it seems like we're passing a piece of paper around between teams. The server team needs to get IP on-premises, they go to networking, perhaps they need something backed up in the public cloud, perhaps they need it monitored by App Dynamics or other tools. These are all things that take place and ultimately slow the developer down who wants to get busy developing software, testing it, and getting it released out into the wild. In addition, as we look at the provisioning process in enterprises today, we see a lot of these consistent problems. Sprawl, lifecycle issues around leases, nobody knows when something should be retired, the handoff, as I mentioned before, too many manual steps, email, phone calls, partial tickets, inconsistency in server builds that leads to a lot of problems down the road, visibility, requests with incomplete data, and a lack of proper integration with tools like ServiceNow to ensure proper CMDB, business layout, change control, incident problem, etc. And our goal is ultimately to address this challenge and enable the following: a reduction in manual steps, improvement in reliability, greater speed to market, greater visibility, and greater satisfaction all around, bringing that Azure, Amazon-like experience to workloads on premises, but fully embracing everything the developer might need to get their service up and running. We also have to take into consideration that workloads drive placement today. It's not enough to say that we just focus on the local data center. We have multiple services that we need to consider, whether that's IoT, edge services, local services in the data center, public cloud services that really now start to use these cloud-native architectures with rapid burst and decommissioning capabilities, as well as SaaS-based services as well. And again, the Automation Hub is our gateway to driving decisions around that. With taking the cloud anywhere also demands a new framework, as you can see here. We focus on a few major areas. In the platform area, again, we've got all those locations, and then as we move up, we want to embrace new technologies such as containers, serverless, etc., with a focus always on the apps and data that sit on top of it. Everything that we use to connect into that then also needs to have rich APIs. We focus on the control plane, the automation and orchestration necessary to stitch everything together, integrating security in there, as well as management and enterprise services capabilities. If we start to dive deeper into the problem itself now and how we address it, let's also look at the customer request and how it typically evolves. Typically the request comes in, but there's sometimes also this prioritization phase, and the developer is again saying, I just want to start writing code, when can I get active? Or somebody that's building an off-the-shelf application may still be waiting for a virtual machine or something else. And now we can see we have this waiting time while emailed requests go around, tickets are bounced around, sometimes they get active again for a period of time, then they have to sort of start up again, learn what they did before to kind of get going again. And ultimately you can see we have this difference between lead time and flow time, and in many enterprises today it can take between 20 to 40 days, if not longer, to get an environment ready for them. We also see today that there's a lot of siloed excellence. A lot of people are doing automation, but they're doing it in silos. So perhaps the infrastructure team is automating something, perhaps the networking team specifically are focusing on IP automation, perhaps security has automated the latest deployment of their endpoint protection tools or login system, but making sure all of these work together is the key thing that we need to address here, and that helps reduce that waiting time as handoffs occur. And in order to achieve this, we recognize that you need a modern, more simplified automation architecture that allows different teams to manage the services they need, release them more effectively, and ultimately provide the needs to the different personas that are ultimately coming in to request services. Those requests may come in via ServiceNow. Perhaps they go into a catalog to request a simple VM or an N-tier stack or a Kubernetes cluster. Perhaps they're requesting services like a new AWS or Azure account that they can use to provision services into. Or perhaps those requests are coming through a pipeline tool. Perhaps they're going through Jenkins or Azure DevOps, and they want a stack deployed as part of their ultimate build to be built out, tested, and torn down as things progress. Ultimately, those you can see, if we follow from the top left and work down, we go through ServiceNow and we have our request ID. This allows us to track metrics throughout the request process. Perhaps we want to track how long things take in pre-provisioning, post-provisioning, how long things take to provision from a security perspective. By tracking the request ID throughout the entire process, we're able to provide those metrics back. We use Integration Hub as part of ServiceNow to quickly lay down our intellectual property and code to get you up and running quickly with a service portal with all the integrations you need. And then we use Technical Orchestrator to connect all those different systems together. That Technical Orchestrator could be vRealize Orchestrator for on-premises in many cases, could use a mixture of Terraform, and could use a mixture of CI/CD tools in the mix there. The right Technical Orchestrator is the one that achieves the outcomes that match your business needs. As we move to the right, you can see we have the stack engine. This is where all the magic happens and how we create stacks and present them up. We would use this to create pre-deploy integrations, modules of code, think of them like Lego bricks. We would focus on things like virtual machines and Kubernetes infrastructure that we need to make available. We know not everybody today is really focused on building a virtual machine. They want to provision rich services, perhaps on top of containers or perhaps on top of PaaS services in the public cloud. And then we have post-deploy integrations, which could be things like monitoring, login, analytics, anything else we want to configure after the fact. Perhaps backup and DR capabilities are there as well. You'll see there also that IaaS hasn't gone away, at least not yet. While we all want to move to containers and PaaS and rich services, we have to recognize that there's still a lot of IaaS out there today. A lot of VM builds where we hand over an OS, but we need to ensure configuration management happens. The stack engine integrates very easily with Puppet, Chef, or Ansible, so we can lay down the configurations of the OS and ensure quality over time. All of this then flows back into our technical orchestrator, back up to ServiceNow, and back down to the CI/CD tools as needed. And ultimately, we want to get the app deployed on the bottom right, as you can see there, whether that's an off-the-shelf application or whether this is something created in-house by your development teams. As DevOps continues to evolve, it's also important to understand full end-to-end stack delivery. It's not enough to say, hey, I just want a VM or a Kubernetes cluster. Perhaps I need a whole pipeline as a service. This is another area we focus heavily on and introduce into the Ahead Automation Hub. You could be requesting a new DevOps project, a new code repository, DevOps pipelines, collaboration with Slack. You want all these things configured, again, so the developer can get back to work. Any stack, any app, any cloud is our motto at Ahead, and this is what we try to provide in our Automation Hub. Before we jump into the demo, just to reiterate again, that tracking via ServiceNow. We've spent a lot of time figuring out the best way to integrate with ServiceNow. There's a lot of plugins out there today, a lot of ways to do it. Our goal is to keep it very simple. Again, we have a progress meter that carries throughout the request of that service, whether that's a web server, a multi-tier stack, whatever it might be. Ultimately, we want to track where it is in the process. One of the biggest complaints developers say is, I send tickets off, it always feels like things go into a black hole. Again, as provisioning continues, we're reporting back to the request ID throughout the process, so the developer can always see when their service is going to be available and where it's held up in the process. These metrics also help you focus on the automation areas that you should address first in order to speed up delivery time and improve quality. With that, let's take a look at the Automation Hub in action. And here you can see we have our Automation Hub. This is the main page that people will go to request their services from your enterprise cloud. We spent a lot of time designing this around customer feedback, specifically around what were the developer pain points, why was IT perceived as slow, what were the things we needed to do to address it, and ultimately this is a layout we came out with. You'll see as you scroll down, there's Sandbox, Standard Stacks, DevOps, and Consulting Services. Sandbox is around requesting sandbox deployments. Perhaps these are temporary environments that people want a place to experiment with, perhaps a temporary AWS or Azure subscription. We have standard stacks. These are stacks that are approved, services that you've onboarded from the public cloud or created internally in your private cloud. So perhaps this is a VM build, N-tier stack, Kubernetes clusters. There's all sorts of options there. Then there's the DevOps services. That focuses on those rich workflows to enable DevOps teams to be more successful. This could be building the pipeline out and integrating all the different tools. It could be sample stacks with Spring, Java, etc. that they want readily available. And then last but not least, we have consulting services. We also recognize that a lot of times developers and customers of IT come to IT to help them, with consult on various projects. And there needs to be some time available to get services like this. This could be helping with an architecture. This could be helping with something very complex that they're trying to do in a public cloud and they're trying to experiment with some new services. This is also something that definitely needs to be tracked. On the left hand side, we've got our catalog. If we zoom in or click those individual items, and then you'll see all the different service requests available here. They can also be filtered by typing in, say we want Azure services, we can filter in there and get things like Node.js with MongoDB. Clicking in there and you can see we'll have a form that asks all the information they need to set up that stack. These could be business variables on the top, like what it's used for, the project, etc. And then moving down into template variables that are actually specific to the Azure ARM templates that we use under the covers. This is one way to quickly get an n-tier stack up and running. If we go back to the categories themselves, and look at, say, DevOps services, you can also see we have things like app dev platforms, Java on AKS. These focus more on those DevOps use cases. Enterprise-ready app dev platforms just add code. These could configure your GitHub repo, Azure Container Registry, SonarQube, Sysdig, etc. These are example stacks ready to go for customers to use. If we go back into standard stacks as well and look at some of the ones there, you can also see we have things like our single OS server request. In this example, we're actually provisioning on premises for this one. We can choose our operating system, Windows or CentOS, how much memory we want. We could do drop downs if we prefer here as well. Choose our CPU, choose the number of instances, which data center we want to deploy it in, what environment it's for, and then do we have any specific data that we need to consider from a regulatory point of view. After we hit the submit button, that request then fires off, and in this case, because it's on-prem, we're actually using vRealize Orchestrator and automation under the covers to translate those variables and provision the appropriate blueprint in VRA. We get immediately taken to a tracking sheet where we can look at our single OS server request and see where it is in the funnel of requests that are out there. If we shift over to vRealize Automation, where we've got all our blueprints for on-premises services, we can go to the Deployments tab and we can now see that we've got a new service provision in there, CentOS 7 on vSphere, that's currently in progress. If we go back over to ServiceNow into our portal and look at some of the previous requests, you also see when services are completed. So if we go down here, we can see here's the history for that request, request approved, connected to VRA, provisioning completed, post-provisioning completed, and request complete. These are all great ways, again, to give that tracking to the user itself. If we go back to our catalog, we can also drill down on other services as well, like Sandbox, as I mentioned before, where we can also create a Sandbox development project or convert a Sandbox to a full project. Perhaps that's something where we want to capture the data that was committed in Sandbox and then build production services off there. And we also have operations and support services as well, increasing resources on servers or updating Kubernetes clusters over time. All of these services can be tailored to what your business needs and ultimately address the needs of your developers. If we go back to the home page and go to dashboards, it's also possible to integrate some of the ServiceNow ITOM features in here if you want them. These include things like resource dashboards, overviews, requests, tagging, some of the cloud management capabilities. These can use native ServiceNow technologies, or we can use third-party services as well, depending on what you require. And that's just a quick overview of the capabilities of the Automation Hub. The key thing here is all the integrations, all the IP and connections that are readily available to accelerate the deployment of this in your environment. The natural next question is, well, how do I get this up and running? How can a head help me enable an Automation Hub in my organization? Well, for one, we can help you accelerate the design and deployment of the hub, the portal, and all the integrations necessary. We can develop blueprints for the services. We'll map out the services and connections you have, all the integrations with security, networking, monitoring teams, etc. to decide what are the right services we need to integrate to get developers up and running quickly. And then we also focus on our enterprise cloud operating model. It's not enough just to say build automation on top of Azure, AWS, or on-prem. It's also important that we have an operating model so you can manage and maintain, govern your environments, whether they're on-prem or in the public cloud. And last but not least, we have a lot of training and operations documents as well. Capacity management, orchestrator training, whatever it might be, that's another area we address. So you are self-sufficient. You can create your own blueprints and services when you're done. With that, thank you for your time, and we look forward to showing you more as we continue to update Automation Hub.